Hi, Marvin. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, Amy. Thanks for having me.
So, everybody knows I have Marvin Stockwell here. And can you just give us a rundown on where you work and what your role is there, Marvin? And I know people will recognize you from the last time we spoke.
Yeah, I'm Marvin Stockwell. I work at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital as the Director of Media Relations.
And so, we're having you back on because you have an update for us on COVID-19 PR. Because I think we
Yeah,
spoke right when this hit. I mean, literally right when, because it was
yeah.
before my kids had to be done with school. So I didn't realize what a big deal this was. And so tell me what is
Yeah.
going on in your world.
Well, when last we spoke, you're right. It was just beginning to dawn on me exactly what we were facing. At the outset, I think St. Jude, like a lot of organizations, um, uh, took that necessary pause to say, what does the world need to hear from St. Jude Children's Research Hospital? You know, there's an old PR maxim that that we as PR pros are asked to think about when we're facing a crisis, and that is, what would a reasonable person expect a responsible organization to do in a situation like this? And I think even though this isn't our crisis per se, well, I guess it is all of our crisis, really. It's the whole world's crisis. So I think a version of that old PR maxim that might serve us all well is, how would a reasonable person expect a responsible organization to conduct itself in this pandemic? And how can my organization be helpful and useful? And I think that's the question that we've all had to ask. And St. Jude was no different. We there was a it was a little bit, well, I guess jarring is the right word to use, because you know no one could have foreseen this coming. Uh, Actually, not that's not true. We have a deep bench of infectious diseases people at St. Jude, and Dr. Robert Webster actually called this at least 15 years ago. But if you're,
Oh, okay. So even before everything happened in China.
Dr. Webster is well into his 80s. He has worked at St. Jude since 1968, and he is one of the true unicorn virologists in the world. He is one of the virologists credited with the understanding that flu comes from birds. The influenza virus comes from birds. So he just to say that he's foundational to that discipline is accurate. So, but if unless you're Dr. Webster at St.
We wouldn't
Jude,
have known. Yeah.
there's no way that you could have foreseen this.
Hmm.
So I, I think that should give us a reason to pause. And St. Jude paused and said, how can we be helpful? How can we be useful to the world? And that was unusual for a kind of real swing for the fences PR guy like me, used to pitching things and always having a grouping of story ideas, things I'm percolating on. Well, the pandemic just, was like a needle across the record, right? Like everybody, the whole world's like, whoa, just what went on? And we in PR had to be responsive just in the same way that our organizations, broadly speaking, were being taking a step back. So all of our conferences that I'd been planning to go to canceled. The areas of emphasis that around that work shelved indefinitely. But instead, St. Jude ended up standing up some very pandemic specific things that were very useful to the world and were great things for me to be able to pitch. The first thing that I found that was useful to pitch was our psychology staffers and child life staffers, a couple of them, a grouping of them, created this coronavirus coloring book so that children ages 5 to 9 could work through their fears and anxiety about the pandemic with a trusted adult.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, they first thought about doing that for our patients because that's their job, right? And they already had existing relationships where they'd worked together on a coloring book for children to understand their cancer diagnosis. So the internal, expertise and teams was already aligned. And then the pandemic hit, and them thinking on their feet, oh gosh, our patients are going to have anxiety around the pandemic. So they set about working on that material. Then midstream, they realized, with a little bit of extra work to do a version of this, we could do an exterior facing version of this that any child anywhere in the world could benefit from. And so now that those resources, which included, there was a part 2 and a part 3, there was a tween resource, and then a more recently a teen resource, developmentally appropriate for that age grouping. And those materials have now been translated into 13 different languages and are available as a free download.
And so you were able to kind of get proactive and get pitching again. So you kind of go back to your comfort level. So so to interject, when we spoke this past March, you were saying, well, this is actually kind of odd because for the first time we're having to pause and not be proactive. And so
that's right.
And you had to really think about, it's not only do you have to drop what you're working on, you were saying you as a hospital couldn't even proactively pitch coronavirus, anything related to coronavirus, right? And I think was that possibly because of the comfort level of your interviewees, or you were just kind of thinking you weren't comfortable with that yet, or what was that point of that?
It wasn't so much our infectious diseases faculty. It was just our leadership taking what was a great pause, like the idea to pause and just say, let's take some time to think before we march anything out was a great strategy.
And how long do you think you paused?
Well, it depends. I would say from anything really, for like, it was with probably less than a week. But my point is, the coloring book came along as a very useful thing to be the first thing out the gate, so to speak, because who wouldn't want to promote a coloring book that could be helpful to literally any child in the world? So that was on mission. It was missionally relevant. It was helpful. It was useful. It checked all those boxes that you need to check in with yourself and decide whether you should push it out. So, and it was also, quite frankly, a softer story to start with. The next thing out of the gate was our St. Jude global team stood up a global observatory and registry to study how the virus is affecting children with cancer. Well, that's the kind of next level of like seriousness that's data informed, and that's been a wonderful pitch as well, and that's gotten coverage at a couple of different stages. The third of which will really be when we reveal what the data tells us, and that'll be in the coming weeks, probably to the next 4 to 6 weeks, I would bet. The last thing to really here's what's at the core of the hesitancy, and that is, we wanted to make sure that we didn't conflate or overstate our expertise in other infectious diseases, because this coronavirus is a brand new coronavirus, and the disease it causes is COVID-19 is a brand new disease. So we just wanted to take the time to make sure that our infectious diseases experts, who are like, we have the deepest bench in infectious diseases, great folks that know all sorts of things about cytokine storms, which is something that's really come to the fore in studying COVID-19 and its effects. But our expertise in understanding cytokine storms related to influenza. But once we were sure that our infectious diseases faculty knew how to be helpful to the conversation, but stop shy of speculation, then our leadership was like, oh, okay. So we've been reacting to media pitches. Sarah Zhang from The Atlantic did a story about cytokine storms. She interviewed Paul Thomas about it, and he did a great job to inform her story based on his knowledge of cytokine storms. Now our leadership has said, we totally get that there is a way for us to be helpful that doesn't overstate or conflate. And now that we know that, now we can march things out proactively. But I think the caution was good.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it was good for everybody. And honestly, I think the media probably appreciated that as well. And I think that that was a huge,
Yeah,
we got some backlash, not we personally, just PR people in general. There was some backlash.
yeah,
Like, well, two things that I noticed. Number one, you can't tie everything into coronavirus.
it's
That's kind
true.
of like a little far reaching. And then number two, your idea of just dropping what you were originally working on. Well, you kind of have to do that because it's not relevant anymore. So you do
That's
have to
right.
put that on the back burner. And I think some PR people didn't do that. And I've been talking about this poor woman who the New York Times was writing an article about bad PR pitches. And and it was kind of a mixed article where they
Yeah.
they were negative about one pitch, but then they propped somebody else up for doing something else. And so this is where you kind of have to think, oh, maybe pausing is a good idea for on multiple levels, even if you're not representing a science client.
Yeah, and the pause for PR practitioners feels long for a PR practitioner, but honestly, especially in hindsight, you realize it really wasn't. Honestly, um, if you look at the broader communications umbrella, and know that you have, say, for instance, I have a digital media counterpart and publications people within a wider comms unit at a larger organization, people who work in advertising, the creative end of things. PR is actually the most flexible and nimble and agile subdiscipline of communications, I would argue, because we have to, as PR pros, we have to constantly be calibrating the pitch. Literally, the news environment can change within the span of one day. How your story lands or how your news lands today, this morning, might be different by the afternoon or the next day. So PR people, it's one of our hallmark strengths, really, that help us pivot. Whereas if a person had just created some wonderful ad campaign based on assumptions that all of a sudden were no longer relevant, think of all that creative that has bound to have been set aside and just trashed forever.
Yeah.
Must be
But
frustrating.
so trying to work fluidly as you do in PR, and as I do as well, is that
Hmm.
hard though when you're in science PR? Because I know that research can take years and years and years to put together. So how does that affect you in the work that you do?
Yes, it can be. Like our global team had just there was a Lancet Commission study that had just concluded 4 years of multi-organization work that was essentially backing up what St. Jude has been saying all along, which is the global pediatric cancer burden is greater than it was previously estimated. And we have a great bench of data scientists who had published several papers in Lancet just last year, with a novel way to estimate the global pediatric cancer burden. So it's very inconvenient that literally right the week that the Lancet decided now is the moment, this substantive thing that took so many organizations, so much work that they pushed out, was absolutely dwarfed by coronavirus news. Does it make it not valid? No. And actually, I think it still will come around to being useful. But yeah, there was no getting coverage for that. I mean, they
So,
literally got no coverage.
but they still pushed it out. So that makes me wonder if they
They
should
pushed
have.
it out just prior. They
Oh,
literally
okay,
pushed it
okay.
out, and then I think it's I don't think they pushed it out, and then maybe a week later it became obvious to everyone. Oh wow, this is going to hit big.
Okay.
So yeah, it was just bad
But
timing.
they could still, so what do you think's going to happen just if you had your crystal ball, in
Yeah,
use for all PR people? So even in this instance, could they pick that back up soon, or and if so, when do you think that could or should happen?
that's a good question. I would say that the work that our global team has pivoted to do, which is to study the virus's effect on children with cancer, is a related work. That's going to basically take the place of it, coverage wise and attention wise. And it's going to be rallying together the same grouping of scientists that are working on children with cancer anyway. So I think it will circle back around to being useful. It's bad timing. But I don't think ultimately it's the end of the world. It's just like you have to respond to these things. I'll take another issue that might demonstrate the concept a little bit better. St. Jude Cloud is our genomic sharing platform that we launched with Microsoft 2+ years ago. There are tons of irons in the fire about data sharing, the federation of data sharing platforms to advance cures faster, right? And we're, of course, part of that conversation. I'd argue leading that conversation. But when the coronavirus hit, our plans to go to AACR and talk St. Jude Cloud were shelved. Just this week, the NCI announced that it's finally ready to issue its summary findings about the Childhood Cancer Data Initiative Symposium, which will really be the NCI saying, we're guessing here, this is how we're going to move the national agenda forward. So I think that tells you something. I feel like the NCI thinks that we're far enough along where the news environment, and they're probably thinking about it from a scientific standpoint, more than a media environment perspective, but I got to believe they realize that people are ready to pay attention to that.
Well, and I would think so. And now, though, I mean, I wouldn't be a good PR person or a news junkie if I didn't mention the political uprising right now. So now we have another, well, it's like we have two pandemics, really. And so how is that going to, and it's not all about us, right? But how is it going to change how we move within our work? And it's not that we have to drop everything that we're doing, but possibly some more thought needs to be woven into what we're doing. And so for instance, diversity and inclusion, bringing that into some of our thoughts in terms of internal PR especially, and possibly external. But then you also don't want to look like you're trying to capitalize on a situation as well.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, whether it's the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, or the killing of George Floyd by police, and the related conversations we're having about racism and race and equality and equity, that are so useful, so necessary, right? I think we have to take a step back and say, how centrally connected are we to these overarching things that command everyone's attention? Now, in the case of the pandemic, a good reason for that St. Jude pause was because we knew, because we have a deep bench of virologists and immunologists and infectious diseases folks, we knew we absolutely got something to say on this issue, substantively, scientifically. So we wanted to make sure that we said the most useful thing, and we had to take a step back and say, how are we going to do the helpful stuff, and then how do we talk about it? As far as racial equality, equity, police brutality, and these related issues that America is really wrestling with, I'll say on a personal note that I am encouraged by that. As an institution, that is something that St. Jude Children's Research Hospital is not only taking seriously, but, founder Danny Thomas, it was important to him that St. Jude was the first integrated hospital in the South. So I think St. Jude can legitimately claim that we have deep roots on this issue. But of course, like every organization and the individuals that comprise it, we have room to grow, right? So I will say this, there is internal work going on at St. Jude. Our VP for Diversity and Inclusion, Kelvin Womack, has teamed up with Janet Sellers, the head of our Resiliency Center. So we have a Resiliency Center have for a good while, aimed at, like if we have a nurse or any staffer really who has their emotional health is being affected by the fact that we have children with catastrophic diseases, that resiliency center is there to make sure that our staff is properly supported. However, in this context, it's really wonderful to see that we have a robust diversity and inclusion effort and a resiliency effort that can really essentially join forces. So Kelvin and Janet are doing these listening sessions. Now that's just the first thing out of the gate. It will need to be more substantive. It will need to be more comprehensive. And the good news is St. Jude was already putting together that plan, and their plans were underway to implement that. Now, the events that have happened in our country are giving that work a new urgency. For sure.
So I just want to take us back to something that you said originally about St. Jude taking a pause, even though you do have something to say about science, you kind of do. I mean, it's a valid thing that you might have to say about taking a pause around the coronavirus. And it reminds me of maybe there are some other companies out there that could take a pause from making these statements about the civil unrest that's happening. And because it's nice that they're making statements and it's good to be saying that, but I've been looking in the community to some of the leaders that I admire, and some people are a little bit taken aback by, it's like, are these statements real? Are you just saying this? It's nice to say something, but what is the action behind that? And so taking a pause, and I do think last week there was a pause where a lot of companies were quiet to let other voices be heard for once.
Sure.
But it's just reminding me that your organization initially took a pause on something that you actually are experts in, which is health and science.
Right. Well, we wanted to be helpful, and I think that's the thing. It's like, back to that PR framing question. How would a reasonable person expect a responsible organization to conduct itself in a situation like this? I think the people who are maybe getting it wrong are the people so keen to rush a statement out. When you're in a crisis, whatever crisis it is, whether it's your organization's specific crisis or a crisis in the world, you're looking for a way to be I think the wrong question to ask is, oh my gosh, what should we say? If that's your approach, you stand an above average chance of marching out something that's ham-fisted and unhelpful. It's like, it shouldn't be about what should we say. Yes, it's ultimately, you have to decide what you should say, but you should reach that answer by asking the question, how would a reasonable person expect a responsible organization to conduct itself in a situation like this? That's the question that keeps you from being so jumpy, if I'm worried, of course, organizations are worried about their reputation and their image and their brand. Of course they are. But it's like, if you come across with an answer that sounds like you're more interested or you're more concerned about your image and brand than you are about what's truly the best and most helpful thing to say, well, you're going to wind up with egg on your face. So I have to go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, it's just interesting for us as PR people, because I think our initial reaction, or not reaction, our initial instinct is to pounce. We're doers. So we want to go. And so
that's right.
And for us to take a minute and pause, or maybe a week to pause, or a month, it's a practice in strategy, right? And so we're always told that the best PR people are those that are strategic. And maybe that's why to get your APR, which I don't have yet because I'm too busy. But
I don't have it either.
Yeah. But it's like, that's what we're told, and it's strategy above all else. And that's hard sometimes for doers. And so when we can pause, maybe the strategy works itself out.
I think that strategy is great. I am not saying that we shouldn't have strategic plans, but there is a time and a place for strategic planning. But I think, again, to the strength of PR, it's to be nimble and agile and take what the defense gives you, right? PR is more like NBA basketball than it is professional football. You know, an NFL team runs a given play, you know, and then they reassess. NBA teams, you know, Steph Curry is streaking down the court. He doesn't know what he's going to do until he does it, you know, and it's PR is more of your NBA fluid motion level, share the basketball and get it in the bucket
Yeah.
level work.
I mean, I kind of get it. Yeah.
It's not, doesn't mean that you shouldn't study film. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't orchestrate plays and have a special inbounds play, you know, drawn up. So planning strategy has its place, but I would argue an overemphasis on that is you can't just have that. I think you have to have iterative nimbleness, you know, in order to be successful.
Right. Well, in a way, we mirror the news. So I've always had this thought that a great PR firm would operate like a news department. I mean, sure, we are a business first and foremost, so that's kind of hard for a PR person to remember. But at the, you know, the surface level, you know, how we do our work, we operate.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Like we should operate like a newsroom. And so, of course, there's some overarching strategy behind what you do, but then we've got to move. And I've noticed a lot of times the ideas don't come until you start just working on something, you know, whether that's building the list or writing the pitch. Like, I don't know what it's going to look like yet, but once I get going, and oftentimes the pitch can change depending on the feedback you get.
It always changes. Like, you know, like I've just seen people fill out requests for Silver Anvil Awards, and then, you know, like to go back and unpack the exactly how things happened, and I think people like polish that up, and it's like I just don't think that's even true. You know, like, because it's like, at my experience in pitching is that, yeah, I'm going to build a media list before I head into it. But, you know, as I'm pitching, I'm going to go, wait a minute, there was that I know this is a perfect person to pitch this. And I'm not going to be like, now hold on a second.
Yeah.
Let me add this to my pitch list, update the file that's in the cloud so that's, you know, no, I'm going to pitch the person. And a lot of times I'm too busy just like rolling with the punches and trying to get coverage that you know, that stuff's never completely 100% updated. You know, it's just, so we have to be responsive. And yes, the pitch changes almost as soon as the pitch is written and you share it around. You know, like sometimes I'll be pitching a story in conjunction with agency partners that are helping me pitch the story, right? And then as the pitch goes on, both of our pitches are changing, and you end up just swapping drafts back and forth. Hey, I'm finding that this is resonating more so than this. Hey, here's a tweak on that, you know, look, you know, and then we just like mix and match. And you always know that a pitch has to be custom anyway. You know, something's going to be, you need to emphasize one thing over another for a given outlet that has a global focus where the other one doesn't, for instance.
So trying to kind of get back to the crystal ball, because I don't think I might have asked you and then I redirected us, but do you see an end in sight to any of the coronavirus coverage particularly?
I think it's changing and will continue to change, but gosh, I wish I had a better report. I wish I would say, Amy, you know what? It looks like science has got the coronavirus licked and we're all going to be back to normal pretty soon. That's not the case. You know, I'm hardwired as a glass overflowing optimist, and but I being in contact with our infectious diseases researchers and clinicians at St. Jude, I can tell you, even just based on what you can observe in the news, I think a fall reemergence of the coronavirus is entirely likely. People are not keeping with social distancing. One of the few interviews that our psychology staff did right before the George Floyd story took over the media world and kind of pushed coronavirus out of the way for a second was the idea that teenagers are now out for the summer, and teenagers are the worst at estimating risk because they think they're invincible, and they're in the lowest risk category. So, and it's summer, it's beautiful. They want to see their friends, but yet social distancing is still advised. Geez, what's going to win out? So it's like teenagers wanting to see each other. I don't know whether you're seeing this or not where you are, but like teenagers are hanging out.
Mm-hmm. Well, and is my tween with his friends, and it's like, I mean, he's really only hanging out with just 2 or 3 friends, so we're not really out there, but still, it's like, oh, and then, but you don't really know where those friends are going.
Yep.
So, but anyway, would you have any advice for PR people who are trying to tie into COVID, but they don't have as good of a hook that you have, being that you work at a hospital?
Yeah. I'd say it all boils down to, or the biggest important variable is how directly do you tie to the COVID response? If your nonprofit is on the front lines of care, then I think your fundraising message can remain strong. I just actually recently taught 2 webinars here in Memphis through a group called Momentum Nonprofit Partners, focused on this. It was a Publicity 101 class with a special focus on the pandemic. And I also went out there and listened to a few webinars. I heard the stress of nonprofits was how do we get our fundraising messages back out there, or how do we sustain them? We're taking all these losses on the fundraising side. And so to nonprofits, that's one of the most important things. And so how closely your mission and work aligns with direct COVID response has everything to do with it. However, take, for instance, a music-related charity. There's a local charity here called Memphis Music Export. And it's basically supports musicians, puts money in their back pocket when they go on tour, gives them tour support, with the idea being that Memphis musicians are ambassadors for the city. It's a great idea. My friend Elizabeth K. Wine thought it up. But they did online concerts to help musicians make up their lost gig money. Now, that's a way that a nonprofit did something that you wouldn't do in a non-pandemic, because those musicians would be playing a club, right? So they thought creatively, and they did something that helped their specific public. And I thought, wow, that is really on brand, on mission for a music-related nonprofit. So those are the types of strategies I think we have to employ. It's harder, quite frankly, to be an arts organization right now, because it's kind of a hierarchy of wants and needs kind of thing. Like I saw this when I was at my previous employer, Church Health, which provides affordable care to uninsured working people and their families, healthcare. They were able to keep their fundraising message strong because they were on the front lines of the Katrina response. There were 10,000 New Orleanians coming up to Memphis to flee Katrina. And we did all sorts of separate stuff to serve them, medicine drives, increased hours, more volunteers. But my point is, they were able to keep their fundraising message strong, whereas the symphony or the opera, it's just tougher. It's tougher because people draw a distinction between what's more vitally important. I might love the opera, but gosh, I want to help these people that are absolutely with their backs against the wall and need urgent help, or they're going to die.
Yeah, but there are still some things that let's say the symphony could do that you could get PR around, like playing music for first responders, or there's things that they could do. But now, what if you're a consumer brand and you don't have any connection at all, and you could possibly fundraise, and it's not like fundraising just for the sake of fundraising, but raise money through, let's say you have a product and you want to give a portion of the sales to the cause, or those kind of things could be an idea.
And I think also back to the useful question. I mean, I think how can we be useful is a great question for any company, nonprofit or for-profit to ask. Let's say you are, let's say you're even a luxury brand, which is like, has to be the toughest spot to be in, right? Is there a way that you can do something that is helpful? Old Dominic's Distillery makes a whiskey here in Memphis. They changed over their equipment and started making hand sanitizer. That's useful.
Yeah,
That's creative. That's creative. And I don't know whether every company's not going to have. Oh, so sorry. Every company's not going to have
hour
that.
For you. It's beer hour for you.
No, I will say this. This is a non-alcoholic beer.
Okay.
At any rate. But it produces burps just the same. So my apologies. Back to the useful question. It's how can we be useful? And if your even consumer brand can be useful. Oh, I read something somewhere. I'm going to get the name of the company wrong. But back to this music related thing, it might have been like Spotify or something. It was one of those music services. Changed their app to make monetizing virtual concerts easier to do. That's a useful thing. Again, back to saying, hey, musicians can't go out to clubs. Let's enable them a little bit better so they can replace their gig money. Again, it's useful. And then that brand, is doing the right thing, but they're also being given credit for doing the right thing and doing the good thing.
So let me ask you a little bit about you, because I know you're busy beyond your job. You also have a blog and you have a podcast, right? Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. About a year ago, I started Champions of the Lost Causes. First as a book that just started kind of flowing out of me, but then a blog and a podcast. It stems from the now 5+ years of work on a civic cause here in Memphis to reopen our long shuttered Mid-South Coliseum, closed in 2007. It's a mid-size, mid-century modern arena. Lots of major cities have your shiny brand new NBA arena, and then they've got their 60s era older arena that in some cases cities just bulldoze them, and in many instances, increasingly actually, cities are finding a way to repurpose them, to retrofit them. And then, they're filled with history. So if you can find a way to find a constructive use for them. So I happen to have helped stand up 2 smaller advocacy-based nonprofits along the route of being the grassroots voice for the reopening of this building. But about 4 years in to that process, I had to take a step back and think, gosh, you must really love this to be essentially working an unpaid part-time job to work on this. I mean, you have to say, wow, 4 years. And I started thinking, what else takes 4 years? And I thought, well, a college degree takes 4 years. And I was like, I kind of chuckled, and I thought, well, this has kind of been my master's degree in advocacy and activism. And from that, I thought to myself, if that's true, where's my dissertation? And then I started thinking about it as a writing project. Started thinking about what would you call that job. I started thinking the parallel between the regular working world and a group of advocates working on a cause for free on their spare time. And I just got really curious about it. I mean, my degree is in journalism. Back to the connection between journalism and PR, like they're flip sides of the same coin. And that was my training. And I think anyone who's a journalist is curious. I think PR people are unbelievably curious people too. And it was that curiosity about what underpins our actions. Why would a group of people bust their hump for 4 years on a cause that most of them, many people pulled us aside and said, you're tilting at windmills. It's never going to happen, Stockwell. But now, 5 years in, we're working hand in glove with the city on VIP tours for potential investors. So we're doing all sorts of things, and now it's a much more plausible idea. So, but Champions of the Lost Causes, the book, and I'm working with an editor now on a manuscript. And I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but I see the light that leads to the light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, that's something.
Yeah, on a manuscript. But then I'm about 12 podcast episodes in, so I'm learning how to be a podcaster.
Mm-hmm.
I probably take some notes from you for sure. And the blog is really my way of serializing the content. So it's just championsoftheLostCauses.org. If somebody wants to kick the tires of that content and give me a shout. And I'm on the social media platforms you'd expect. But
okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll share that in the show notes as well.
That'd be great.
So,
that'd be
well,
great.
Thank you. This was wonderful. Good just catching up with you
Yeah.
and getting updates since we talked to you we really talked to you before you even really knew what you were even going to do about it.
Oh, I had no idea, Amy.
You couldn't really even talk about it. So
no,
so
I was just
great.
like, something just happened, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think we had our interview scheduled even before that and happened. So it was, and I was like, well, can I just sneak in a little coronavirus question for you? You're like, well, sure. I don't know how I'll answer, but.
Yep, absolutely. I think you and I met at PRSA Icon last year, and it's interesting. I'm in discussions with some of the folks putting together PRSA Icon this year, and I thought, like, gosh, this has been a robust year.
Yeah, and this should be, so Icon should be happening in October, but now if it wasn't coronavirus. So now I don't know if they're going to have it, but
I don't think they know whether they're going to have it in Nashville or not. It's going to happen. It just might be virtual.
Mm-hmm.
They're still weighing that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We appreciate getting to see you again and learn from you as always.
Thank you, Amy. I really appreciate you having me.